Good morning and welcome to First Baptist Church of Cooperstown. I'm so excited that you're able to worship with us, and I'm glad that we're able to be together virtually even if we're not able to be together in person. This morning is a Communion Sunday, and before we begin worship, I just want to give a brief instruction. Traditionally, whenever Christians take communion, we use bread and either grape juice or wine, but I invite you to use whatever elements you have at home and to join us during the service and take communion along with me from wherever you happen to be. And here at FBC, we practice what is known as open communion, which means that no matter who you are and no matter where you are on your journey of faith, you are invited to join us at the Lord's table. There is absolutely no one who is not welcome to partake of communion with us this morning. Welcome to worship. Please join me in our call to worship by reading the bold text on your screens at home. Welcome this day to a time of rest. We come bearing burdens and cares. Place your lives in the loving hands of God. May God heal our spirits and strengthen us. Trust in God who is always with you. Lord, this day we come to you in faith and trust for your healing mercies. Please pray with me. Come to us, Holy God, and immerse us in the beauty of life with you. Come to us, Holy One, and enliven our community with the intensity of your love. Come to us, Holy One, and embolden our community with the urgency of your justice. In the name of the one who calls us to love and work in community, Jesus, our beloved. Amen. Please pray with me. Wise and loving God, you know how we are. We have spent so much time getting ready for the summer, planning when and how we should relax and gain some peace in our lives. We have rushed around and now we are exhausted. Our need for rest is important, but we have let plans and schedules crowd in, shouting their demands on time and energies. Forgive us, Lord, when we have focused so much time on these things and have not sought your healing, restoring love. Be with us as we enter this summer period. Give us peace and remind us of our priorities. We ask these things in the name of the one who taught us how to pray, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Our Old Testament lesson comes from Genesis 24, 34 through 38, 42 through 49, and 58 through 67. So he said, I am Abraham's servant. The Lord has greatly blessed my master, and he has become wealthy. He has given me flocks and herds, silver and gold, male and female servants, camels and donkeys. And Sarah, my master's wife, bore a son to my master when she was old, and he has given him all that he has. My master made me swear, saying, You shall not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, in whose land I live, but you shall go to my father's house, to my kindred, and get a wife for my son. I came today to the spring and said, O Lord, the God of my master Abraham, if now you will only make successful the way I am going, I am standing here by the spring of water. Let the young woman who comes out to draw, to whom you say, Please give me a little water from your jar to drink, and who will say to me, Drink, and I will draw for your camels also. Don't let her be the woman whom the Lord has appointed for my master's son. Before I had finished speaking in my heart, there was Rebekah coming out with her water jar on her shoulder, and she went down to the spring and drew. I said to her, Please let me drink. She quickly let down her jar from her shoulder and said, Drink, and I will also water your camels. So I drank, and she watered the camels. Then I asked her, Whose daughter are you? She said, The daughter of Bethuel, Nahor's son, whom Milcah bore to him. So I put the ring on her nose and the bracelets on her arms. Then I bowed my head and worshipped the Lord, and blessed the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who had led me by the right way to obtain the daughter of my master's kinsman for his son. Now then, if you will deal loyally and truly with my master, tell me. And if not, tell me, so that I may turn either to the right or to the left. And they called Rebekah and said to her, Will you go with this man? She said, I will. So they sent away their sister Rebekah and her nurse along with Abraham's servant and his men. And they blessed Rebekah and said to her, May you, our sister, become thousands of myriads. May your offspring gain possession of the gates of their foes. Then Rebekah and her maids rose up, mounted the camels, and followed the man. Thus the servant took Rebekah and went his way. Now Isaac had come from Beer Lahai Roi, and was settled in the Negeb. Isaac went out in the evening to walk in the field, and was looking up. He saw the camels coming, and Rebekah looked up. When she saw Isaac, she slipped quickly from the camel, and said to the servant, Who is that man over there, walking in the field to meet us? The servant said, It is my master. So she took her veil and covered herself, and the servant told Isaac all the things he had done. Then Isaac brought her into his mother Sarah's tent. He took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. So Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. The treasure of God's glory is Jesus shining in our hearts. We hold this treasure in the earthen vessel of our lives. So let us share freely of the gifts that we have been given, that the glory of God may be known in the works of community, justice, and peace in this congregation. I invite you to take this time now to prepare your gift and special offering to First Baptist Church. And there are two ways to do that. You can either write a check and mail it to our church office at 21 Elm Street, Cooperstown, New York, 13326, or you can click the link in our virtual bulletin and go to our website's PayPal page and give online. And I want to make you aware of two offerings we are taking up in the month of July, in addition to our regular pledges to the church. First, every year we take up a special offering for the One Great Hour of Sharing, which is an ecumenical offering that we share with many other Protestant denominations, and there will be information in the virtual bulletin about where exactly all of that money goes to. In addition to that, we are raising money for our friends in Honduras. We are unable to go to Honduras and engage in our usual mission project this year, but our mission partners still need us. So we invite you to give and just put Honduras in the memo line of your check or indicate it on your PayPal gift, and we will send that money to our ministry partner who will use it to buy food for the people in their community. So I invite you to give now your regular pledge, and additionally, if you are able, either to Honduras or One Great Hour of Sharing. But please make sure you designate how you want your gift used so we don't put it somewhere incorrectly by mistake. Something's not quite right about Isaac. My southern grandmother would say, well, bless his heart, and Hank Hill would say that boy ain't right, but we can all agree that there's just something a little off about the gentleman. His name means laughter. In fact, it is the Hebrew word for laughter. He earned the name because when his mother Sarah heard that she would have a child at her advanced age, she laughed. And her laugh of skepticism became a laugh of joy when she finally had her long-awaited child. And that's how the laughter around Isaac started off. Nicely enough in the beginning, but we're not laughing with Isaac anymore in this story. In fact, everyone in the text seems to be laughing at him. God's promise to Abraham is that he would be the ancestor of a great nation, and that through that nation, all other nations in the world would be blessed. But that promise is under threat once again. This time, it isn't a perceived threat from Isaac's Gentile sibling or Abraham's own cowardice, as it had been in the past. This time, the problem is that Isaac is 40 years old and has never had a girlfriend. I think Steve Carell starred in a movie about that a few years ago. And I just want to say there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, and I don't want you to hear me saying that there is, but in Isaac's circumstances and culture, it was odd. The problem is that if Abraham is going to have so many descendants that there will be more of them than sand on the seashore and stars in the sky, he's going to need some grandchildren, and he's going to need them now. In our story, Abraham is having something of a moment because he thinks he's about to die. And he knows his son, he knows Isaac isn't going to take the initiative on his own, so Abraham decides to do it himself. So he sends one of his more trusted servants to go back home to the Fertile Crescent and find Isaac a wife from the same tribal group, so to say. And this is a problem. It was a problem then, and it's even more of a problem now in an American context because our culture obviously has a very serious problem with race, and we have lingering anxieties about interracial marriage. Bible passage like this can be used to legitimize discrimination and fear. In fact, it has been used that way. And that is horrible. There's no other way to put it. The barriers that the Apostle Paul wants to break down in Galatians 3, and that God wanted to break down in Acts 10, in our time include the anxiety we have against marrying people from different backgrounds, nations, and ethnicities. I've said it before, not every single thing we read in the Bible is the will of God. There are parts that prescribe God's will and parts that describe cultural convention. And Abraham's plan here is an example of the latter. It's racist, and it's not okay, and I want you to hear me say that. Abraham's servant wasn't a very big fan of the plan either, but not because he had a problem with the racist implications, but because he didn't want to travel 400 miles one way to try to find a wife for Isaac. The people reading this for the first time, familiar with the culture, would have been snickering at the absurdity of the situation. This guy couldn't have been happy about his lot, and somewhere along that arduous trek through the desert, he made a bargain with God. He decided to wait at a well to see if God's choice might miraculously show up. Meeting someone at a well in the ancient Near East wasn't that uncommon in those days. It was like a cross between eHarmony and going into a bar. It was a perfectly reasonable place for him to look for someone for Isaac. But the irony here is that he planned to wait for somebody who would offer to water his camels. Camels drink about 40 gallons of water at a time. So he was waiting for a young woman who was willing to carry, by hand, 2.5 tons of water up and down the stairs from the well to the trough, back and forth, until all those camels had enough to drink. That's ridiculous. Nobody's going to do anything like that. And then Rebecca enters the scene. And this story sets the tone for her for the rest of her life. It shows us what she's like. She is impulsive, generous, hospitable, and terribly naive. So she waters the camels, and then she invites this stranger home to dinner. And considering the bargain he had with God, of course, he said yes. And he arrives at Rebecca's family home and learns that they're actually related. They're distant cousins, and he must have been delighted because the patriarchs were just a little bit racist, so keeping things in the family wouldn't have been seen as a bad thing. The servants went through the whole explanation of God's promise to Abraham, his employer's massive wealth, and all the plans that Abraham and the servant himself had worked out with God. Her brother Laban wasn't impressed. He pointed out that the whole situation was just too weird. And maybe they'd better see what Rebecca has to say before they ship her off 400 miles from home to marry somebody she'd never met before. That distance at that time meant she would likely never see any of her family or friends again. It was a good idea, but it turned out to be a mistake, because true to form, she agreed immediately, and they set out the next day. The journey would have taken a few weeks. And Scripture says that when they finally arrived back home, Isaac was outside of his tent one night doing something out in the field. And what he was doing is actually a linguistic mystery. The word for whatever it was only appears a single time in the Hebrew Bible, but there are similar words in ancient Hebrew and other ancient languages that are related to it, and all of them mean something like going to the restroom. So Rebecca's first impression of Isaac is this, and when she sees what is happening, she fell off of the camel. But the joke is that falling off of a camel is a metaphor for seeing something so ugly that it makes you pass out. And this is the time in our story where she regrets agreeing to sign on to be a part of this Isaac project. Because as the story unfolds, she's less of a wife and more of a babysitter for this guy. And then we finally get to the end of our story, and this is where things get creepy. And it's also the part that finally helps us make sense of everything that's been going on so far. They get married, and he takes her to his late mother's tent, Sarah having died in the previous chapter. And a lot of English Bibles leave out that part because it's weird, but the Hebrew makes it clear. It's explicitly put there. And that answers some questions. Why has this 40-year-old heir to a vast fortune never married and shown any interest in marrying? The text subtly reminds us of his relationship with his mother Sarah, and that implies an answer. We remember that Sarah was so overbearing and overprotective that she sent Isaac's brother into the desert to die so that he wouldn't grow up with any kind of competition. She was his best advocate, and she had gone overboard doting on him. She was overbearing, and we can imagine that no one would have been good enough for her Isaac. It's no coincidence that it was only after Sarah died that Abraham turned his attention to finally getting himself some grandchildren. And I think it's safe to imagine that the relationship between Abraham and Isaac was strained at best after the whole, well, let's call it the sacrifice incident. I imagine that would have made things awkward at family reunions. This is a weird story, isn't it? This isn't something we expect to read in the Bible. It's like a bad soap opera. You can imagine the people for whom this was written putting their face in their hands and wincing because they knew they were related to all of these people. And that is the point. God used these weird, dysfunctional, creepy people. God used the cowardly scoundrel Abraham, the cheater Jacob, and the underachieving Isaac, who is so unimpressive he doesn't even get his own story in the ancestor narratives. He's only ever mentioned in the context as being someone's husband, father, or son. God used these frail, faulty humans because, after all, every character in Scripture is flawed, with the exception of one. The point of the story is to remind us not to idolize the people we read about in Scripture. We're not supposed to think about them as giants of faith, too saintly to imitate. They were people just like we are, flawed and silly and ridiculous just like we are, hopefully a little more so. If God can use someone like Isaac the loser, then we are without excuse. We can't say that we are not up to the standard of people of faith in Scripture, or that we are not up to the challenge of serving God in the community, because we absolutely are. It's not a question of our worthiness or abilities. It is simply a question of responding to God's call. It isn't a question of what we can do. It's a question of whether God can accomplish God's purposes in spite of human flaws. One of the most comforting things I've ever heard is that when God made a plan for our lives, God accounted for our stupidity. This makes the Bible a lot more accessible and a lot more human than we often think about. We usually can't identify with the super holy, one-dimensional, monolithic saints from back then, but we can all identify with family drama. We all know what overprotective parents are like, what people without initiative and people who make hasty decisions are like, and some of us know what terribly strained parent-child relationships look like. People haven't changed in the millennia since all this was written down. These are human stories, and they're not sanitized or censored so they can be made holy. They're holy because they're uncensored and dirty and weird, just like we are. This story shows us that God is the God of scoundrels and imperfect people and all the other things you want to say. God will meet us where we are and use us as we are. If we were capable of fulfilling God's mission on our own, we wouldn't need grace. And God knows we all do. This is the table, not of the church, but of the Lord. It is made ready for those who love God and those who wish to love God more. So come if you have much faith, and if you have but little. You who have been here often, and you who have not been for a long time. You who have followed, and you who have tried and failed. Come, because it is the Lord who invites you, and it is God's will that those who want him should meet him here. On the night that Jesus was betrayed, he was having dinner with his friends. During the meal, he took a loaf of bread and he broke it. And he said, "This bread is my body, which is broken for you. Every time you eat of it, do so in remembrance of me. Take now and eat the bread of heaven." After the meal was over, Jesus took a cup, and in like manner he poured it out. And he said, "Every time you drink of this, do so in remembrance of me. For this is my blood, which is shed for the forgiveness of sins. Take now and drink the cup of salvation." Go forth in peace to live into Jesus' most joyful command. Come to me, and may we follow him into a rest that bears fruit in justice, love, and peace for each of us. Amen.